بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا افتح لنا أبواب رحمتك واحفظنا وكن معنا واشفينا وارفع البلاء عنا واغفر لنا ذنوبنا ونصلي ونسلم على النبي الذي أرسلته بالهدى ودين الحق. I wanted to focus a few minutes on the psychological and social impact of the coronavirus, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the psychological dimensions. One is that the coronavirus has pushed people into a situation in which they have to really look at themselves as individuals, and physically existence becomes an individual existence because of the type of distance that you have to maintain from others in order to preserve your well-being and the well-being of others. And that in itself creates a dilemma for a lot of people, a crisis of meaning. It creates a sense of loneliness, isolation, alienation. Those things are pretty detrimental for parts of the population that are already suffering that, right? So people that suffer from different struggles when it comes to emotions, connectivity with others, this only isolates them more, and it creates a problem. It creates a serious problem, and I think that, we're going to have to look at what will be the impact of this after the fact. If things calm down in the near future, the immediate future, or in the distant future, we're going to have to look at the way that this virus has impacted us. Now, you have to remember in the past, the level of distancing that you see, this is really fundamentally part of European culture. The handshake is symbolic of that. The handshake is symbolic of that distance that you have between yourself and another. And so, a culture was formed around that whole concept of distancing and, not really trusting. And then there's others, even in some European cultures, but, mostly we were talking about the Anglo-Saxon culture, even if you want to say, well, that's not technically European. I don't want to get into those details, but still within that concept, people remain pretty distant from each other. And so you have in other cultures, people tend to be a little more emotional, a little more close. They tend to be, not so distant. And so there were other issues that we were already suffering in the society with relationship breakdowns, with mistrust, and so on and so forth. And I think, honestly, we need to really reflect upon how this is going to either bring us more close together in appreciating human relationships, or is going to create more mental health issues. There's a tendency of people in these types of situations to become, suicidal. And then the issue gets worse when you start looking at people's security, their homes, their cars, their livelihood, their shelter, their food supply. When all of that stuff is impacted, the basic needs of human beings, what kinds of emotions and thoughts begin to come into people's minds. That's why, we have to be very supportive. And I mentioned this in another series of lives, that, the types of information that we put out there have to be affirmative, because this is a time period where we flood, especially social media, which is a place which we go to be social and connect with others. If we flood that with negative messaging, and I'm not talking about positive thinking, I'm talking about if that's overwhelmingly flooded by crisis and problems, it's just going to accelerate the issues that we're talking about, if they're there already. Mental health issues, loneliness, breakdown, all that type of stuff. As far as the social impact is yet to be felt. We're beginning to see, like, the way that Nevada dealt with its homeless population and separated them in the squares of 6 feet apart. We don't know the social impact yet, because the economics of this is not really clear of where this is going. Right now there's somewhat of a security blanket. But that too, the social impact from the group as a whole, not individuals what they're going through, but the group as a whole societies, whole countries, families. We don't know what that's going to be like. And it's going to take a certain type of personality to be able to navigate that. So then the question becomes, for those who pull back into religion as a safeguard, as a security net, what kinds of values are we going to have in a time period in which people are emotionally disoriented and society becomes a society that we did not know in the past? This is going to be the real test of what kinds of people we become. What kinds of religious values do we manifest? Do we turn to an animal type instinct, which is just survival, or do we, think about the well-being of humanity? And then, what happens when those types of values clash? When you have one group of people or one person is, more focused on just survival and survival of the self, and another person is thinking about cooperation. One of the things that has been a response on a global level, which is a religious value, even though you find that the countries that are operating out of this may not necessarily be religious, is the principle of solidarity. So this is an opportunity for the Muslim community to begin to rethink about the issue of ummah and, our commitment to humanity. And that doesn't mean that we are not thinking about our own interests and our own well-being at the same time. There's a balance between self-preservation and preservation of the group. But there's no doubt that if in this type of context, certain values will dominate, and certain values as they dominate will either build us or destroy us. And so you see, even unfortunately, some religious circles, they have chosen some values that have put the community in hazard. And you see that some people in general, maybe not religious, they've chosen some values. Like, for instance, I'm just going to party hard. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and forget about others. And you see that both groups, whether religious or not religious, have chosen values which in reality are not solid, and are not necessarily representative of the goodness of humanity. And this causes a crisis for people. It causes an existential crisis. Like, what is the meaning of life? People begin to ask that question. And then there's other issues too. Like, for instance, what happens if you catch corona and then your family disregards you or doesn't want you around? There, again, that goes back to the issue of what you're going to experience as an individual. And then, the situation of the family itself trying to preserve itself. This is psychologically going to disorient a lot of us. And so we have to be able to process things day by day, moment by moment. And we have to be able to be honest with ourselves with regard to the emotions that we're going through. But we also have to respect each other. We just can't tear into each other and break down each other. We have to realize that we're dealing with each other. We're dealing with frailty. We're dealing with human beings that have limits. And so we have to be, people of forbearance without being people that are foolish and allowing people to walk over us. And we have to be people of concern and love, but also with those limits that are necessary in order for that to be healthy. And I'm not trying to be preachy here. I'm really just trying to say that we need to be thinking about how we're going to navigate this new terrain. This is going to be a new psychological terrain that we navigate. And they're already signaling that from different places in the society, leadership spaces, that people are going to have to get used to no handshaking, no this, no that. For how long are we going to move in that direction? Especially if that's part of our psychological, emotional, social makeup, the intimacy. What does that mean for people that are spouses or husband and wife, and, or people that have children, or grandparents? What does all of that mean? And that's why we have to, be able to coach each other through these moments of difficulty on the emotional, spiritual level, so that we can navigate this property. And the point that I want to end on is this, that there's a lot of misinformation or contradictory information, and there's a lot of speculation. A lot of the way that the numbers are managed with the COVID stuff is projections, and that's not to say that it's not valid. I'm not saying be a skeptic, but what I am saying is, like, learn how to be scientific and see how things are calculated, so that way, you know, you can kind of reel in some of the fears and some of the instability that's there in the everyday life process. CNN recently published something talking about the issue of the numbers and kind of downplayed it a little bit, you know, but we have multiple things going on. As we have those numbers running, we also have the stock markets crashing. We also have corporations deciding of who they're going to keep and who they're not going to keep. And we're kind of in a Jumanji type of situation where 1,000 things are being thrown at us at one time, and we have to learn how to navigate them. But solidarity is one value that we can't, you know, give up in this type of struggle. Compassion is another one. You know what I'm saying? Again, we have to have our necessary boundaries to keep things stable within our own selves. But we have to learn to think about what are going to be the values that help us to recreate and help us to maintain our own sanity and stability. And love is one of those, that it's an emotion, it's an action, it's a value, you know what I'm saying, that we can't dispense of. You know, and sure, there's tough love, but still we have to be those people that are committed to those types of values. You know, if not, you know, we have to really question, most of all, where does our humanity go? Assalamu alaikum.